Hi team, I'm Daryl and it's time to do a little Stella Chewy's 101. Today we're going to go over why raw, the features and benefits of raw, our freeze-dried versus our competitor, and our freeze-drying versus dehydrating. And last but not least, we're going to go over the Stellarator. Team, now it's time to talk about why raw. Why do we do what we do at Stella Chewy's? The whole entire philosophy is based on what's called the prey model philosophy. Why am I talking about prey? Because this whole entire philosophy is based on what the wolf would eat out in the wild. It's not like the wolf is chasing 30-pound bags of kibble with 4 legs or chasing oversized canned food rolling down hills. They're chasing prey. And so that's why we do what we do. Daryl, why are you telling us about wolves if dogs aren't wolves? Well, that's not so. Dogs are actually wolves. Before 1993, dogs and wolves were categorized as 2 totally different species. The wolf, Canis lupus, and the dog, Canis familiaris. But the science community was debating about this until a doctor named Robert Wayne at the University of California, Los Angeles decided to put the debate to rest. Dr. Wayne wanted to test the genes. Not the genes that you would buy at Men's Warehouse for buy one, get one free, or Lucky Genes. I'm talking about the DNA. There's 2 types of DNA that Dr. Wayne tested. He tested the nuclear DNA and the mitochondrial DNA. Let's start off with the nuclear DNA. The nuclear DNA has to do with what's going on the outside of the animal, bone structure and size differential. The one we want to focus on is the mitochondrial DNA. That's the DNA that's passed on through the mother alone. When Dr. Wayne tested the mitochondrial DNA of the gray wolf and the dog, they found that there was a 99.9% similarity between the gray wolf and the dog. Why is that important? Because the mitochondrial DNA is intrinsically linked to the animal's physiology, their GI tract, their metabolism, how they digest food. The science community decided to change the classification of the dog's scientific name. Remember, the wolf, Canis lupus, and now they changed the dog to Canis lupus familiaris, the domesticated wolf. So since there's a 99.9% similarity between the gray wolf and the dog's physiology, let's talk about that. Let's talk about their GI tract. Everything having to do with digestion starts right here, in the mouth, in the teeth, in the jaws. Us as humans do something called chewing. The technical term for that is mastication. We're able to chew and we have a flexible mouth that our jaws go side to side. The dog doesn't have that. We have to chew our pieces down into really, really little pieces to help us with digestion. Again, we masticate. But guess who doesn't? The dog. The dog's jaws are a stiff hinge. They only go up and down like this. They cannot chew. Their jaws are meant for nothing more than grabbing, tearing, ripping, and crushing bone. The second major difference between us and the dog is in the saliva. We have an enzyme in our saliva called syllabic amylase. Amylase breaks down carbohydrates and starches. The dog and the wolf don't have that because out in the wild, they're not hunting carbohydrates and starches, they're hunting prey. So the dog's saliva is nothing more than a lubricant to help it get from point A, the mouth, the teeth, and the jaws, down the esophagus, and into the stomach. Yay! So we talked about the mouth, the jaws, and the teeth. We talked about the saliva. Let's now talk about the stomach. As humans, you always hear our stomach is the size of our fist. Our stomach is meant for pre-digestion. It's about 20% of our GI tract. A dog's stomach is different. It's not 20%, it's not 30%, it's not 40%, it's actually 70% of their GI tract. It's a very, very large organ and it's meant to be filled. Just to put things in perspective, guess how much an 80-pound fasted wolf can put down in 30 seconds? 22 pounds. That's how big the dog's stomach is. A wolf won't stop eating until they're fully satiated, until they're full, and then they'll rest. Now that we talked about the GI tract, let's talk about what's going on inside the animal. Remember that 80-pound fasted wolf that took down 22 pounds in 30 seconds. He had to grab that prey, he had to rip it, tear it, crush it, he had to lubricate it, swallow it, have it go down into the stomach, and now that food stuff needs to get broken down into its simplest compounds. Every single nutrient is made up of molecules, and those molecules need to be broken down into their simplest compounds in order to be assimilated by the body. Since we're talking about the prey model diet, let's talk about the protein molecules. When the food stuff enters the stomach, it's in a form that's too large for the animal's body to assimilate. It needs to be broken down to its simplest compound. There's 3 steps to getting this done. In the stomach, there's an enzyme called pepsin. A molecule of protein is built up called polypeptide bond. It needs to be broken down into smaller pieces. Pepsin is the first step in this breakdown. That's your polypeptide bond. It's now being broken down to what's called a dipeptide bond. After the stomach is done breaking down the protein into a smaller piece, it then goes into the intestines where the second enzyme, trypsin, breaks it down into even smaller pieces. Remember, it's now a dipeptide bond, and now it's going to get broken down into a peptide bond. And to finish things off, there's an enzyme called aminopeptidase. And aminopeptidase breaks that peptide bond down to the smallest compound called an amino acid. So that's how a protein molecule gets broken down to its simplest compound. And carbohydrates has its own set of enzymes, and so does fats. When you're feeding raw, the beauty of it is the foodstuff is in a form that nature intended it to be. Therefore, the animal's body can do what nature intended it to do. It's all about breaking it down on the molecular level and getting the nutrients down to their simplest compound. All right, guys, now that we talked about the GI tract, we talked about the teeth, the jaws, the mouth, we talked about the esophagus, the saliva, the stomach, and we talked about how protein molecules, carbohydrates, and fats get broken down to their simplest compound. But let's talk about some of the benefits of feeding raw. One of the things that you always hear about raw food is that it has a higher absorption rate. That the animal consumes the food stuff because it's in its natural form, which allows the body to do what nature intended it to do. Therefore, they're getting more out of that food stuff. Right now, I want to show you a little example where I playfully put some color to why an animal and how an animal absorbs more nutrients from a raw food diet than they would from something that's heavily processed. I'm a little crazy, a little cuckoo, a little obsessive compulsive. My kids love to play with the Play-Doh, but they know it drives me crazy if they mix the Play-Doh. This is my example of what happens when an animal eats a raw food diet. So my kids will be playing with the Play-Doh, and they're doing all this stuff that they like to do. They're making their shapes, they're doing the molds, and they're playing, and they're playing, and they're listening to Daddy. And they understand, don't mix the Play-Doh. Then when it's time to clean up and I come by, I'm able to take the red protein, put it in its proper container. Look at that, no waste. I'm able to take the carbohydrates, the blue, put it in its container, no waste. Then I take the green and I put it in its container, the fat. Every single one of these nutrients or colors of Play-Doh went back into its proper container. There was no issue, there was no waste. That's what's going on inside the animal's body. Everything is easily put where it needs to go so it can be used all up. No waste. However, when I go and travel, my wife's in charge, and that's when things start to change. Uh-oh! She just gives the Play-Doh to the kids, and they don't care. They know Daddy's not there, and they start to play with the Play-Doh, and they mix the Play-Doh. So they're playing and doing all their things with the shapes and the molding and the games. They're having a good old time, and then guess who comes home? Daddy.
Daddy's home.
And I start to freak out. So now they're all mixed up, and this is really, really frustrating to me. But this is what's going on inside the animal's body. Now what has to happen is the animal's body needs to start to break down all these denatured proteins, carbohydrates, and fats into their smallest compound. So now the body's got to try to separate all this stuff. And so the white, which is the protein, I'm sitting here trying to pull it apart, and you can see how stressful this is. It's taking a lot of energy. It's stressful both emotionally and physically. I'm trying to get all the white into the white. I'm trying to get all the purple into the purple. And look, the body is able to really do a good job breaking down nutrients, and no matter what form it is. But when it's cooked and everything is fused together like this, It's a lot less efficient, it's a lot less optimal, and it's a lot more time consuming. So what ends up happening is, yeah, the body's gonna be able to separate the white from the white and the purple from the purple and the orange from the orange. The protein, fat, and the carbs are going to get broken down the best that they possibly could. But what ends up happening at the end is you're going to have this ball of Play-Doh, a color, okay, that I don't have a container for. And therefore, I have to throw it into the trash container. So yes, it does an efficient job breaking down the nutrients into their simplest compound. But at the end of the day, there's going to be significant waste, which means there was less absorption, less digestion, and more poop. That's why when customers come back in the store, they have a full understanding of what's going on inside their dog's body. They understand how efficient raw food is being digested, and they're seeing the results too because they're picking up less poop, which is a good thing for them. Let's talk about another big issue with animals, and that's weight management. In retail, we hear all the time about dogs coming in that are 10 pounds overweight. I like to call them barrels with 4 legs. Well, how do we address the problem? We need to be able to educate the retailer so they can educate the customer on what's going on inside the animal's body. This is what's going on. If a dog is eating a food that is high in carbohydrates and starches, it's causing an issue. It's offsetting the balance. What do I mean by that? Dogs and cats have no minimum requirement for carbohydrates and starches in their diet, like they need amino acids and essential fatty acids.
Say what?
What they need is a glucose precursor. So the issue with dogs that are eating high grain-filled diets is that the dog is taking all of its energy, glucose, from that carb and starch. Therefore, the fat is storing. So when you eliminate the carbohydrates and starches from a dog's diet, they need to get their energy from somewhere. That's when they start to utilize the fat from the diet. Raw is a solution because the more you eliminate carbs and starches from the diet, the animal will start to burn its fat. 1 pound, 2 pound, 3 pound gone. After feeding a raw food diet and over the right amount of time, that animal's body is going to start to burn all that fat, and they're going to be at a natural, healthy weight. So we talked about absorption rate, we talked about weight management. There's some other great benefits from feeding raw. Freedom from allergies, better energy and vitality, a stronger autoimmune system, and better dental health. Feeding raw is going to lower the probability on a lot of issues out there. So let's do a little competition here between Stella Chewy's and one of our competitors. We at Stella Chewy's believe we're the gold standard of freeze drying, that we do it right and we do it better than anybody else in the industry. We have 165,000 square feet of manufacturing, and we're about to have 30 freeze dryers. We know what we're doing because we control the processes. Our competitor doesn't do their own freeze drying. They use a third party. They don't have control over their processes. This is a little experiment that I like to do that shows you the raw integrity of the product. In your blood, you have an enzyme called catalase. If you were to put hydrogen peroxide on a cut, what happens? It bubbles up. In raw meat, there's also catalase. So what I'm going to do is basically take hydrogen peroxide and pour it on the Stella Chewy's chicken, and I'm gonna pour it on the chicken. And we're gonna see how quickly and what the reaction is going to be. So let's start off with the chicken. Here goes the hydrogen peroxide. So you can see there is a reaction, and it's slowly bubbling up. Now let's put it on the Stella Chewy's chicken. As you can see, the raw integrity of our product is superior to that of our competitor. All right, team, let's talk about the differences between freeze drying and dehydrated. We at Stella Chewy's are the gold standard of freeze drying. We are the kings of this process. Freeze drying is amazing. We're able to take the frozen food stuff and convert it to a dry matter by skipping the liquid stage. It's called sublimation. You're taking the ice, you freeze dried, and it turns into a vapor, and then at the end of the freeze dried process, which takes about 20 hours, you have a shelf stable dry matter product that has all its raw integrity intact. All right, team, that was freeze drying, but now let's talk about the dehydration process. This is very, very different than what we do at Stella Chewy's. Dehydrating is done for about 4 to 6 hours, and you're using temperatures around 165 degrees. Heat damage starts at 125 degrees. That means the raw integrity is going to be denatured. With dehydrated, you start off with foodstuff at its room temperature. And for 4 to 6 hours, you're dehydrating something at 165 degrees. The water is actually being cooked out. It's evaporating. So after 4 to 6 hours, you have a shelf-stable dry product, but it's not raw because it's been cooked.
Science rules.
Our raw foundation at Stella Chewy's will always be raw frozen and raw freeze-dried. But our goal today is a little different. We want to do our part and provide tools for our retail partners to drive customers to the raw food category. We've created a logical progression, a roadmap to raw, a conversation floor plan. Ladies and gentlemen, Stella Chewy's team, I present to you the Stellavator. Just like an elevator, the Stellavator works both ways. You can start from the top and work down, or you can start from the bottom and work up. Let's start at the top. Let's talk about that retailer that's really passionate about raw, frozen, or freeze-dried. In this scenario, that retailer would want to just rip the Band-Aid off and take them to our penthouse suite, frozen, or our super Stella suite, the freeze-dried dinner meals. But what if the customer isn't ready to make the commitment to full-on raw? Where do they go from here? Now they can go down a floor on the Stellavator to the magical mixer suite, to our meal mixers. This is a great solution for the customer that might not be ready for raw, frozen, or freeze-dried. They're currently feeding a kibble. They're not that comfortable. This is something that they can just add to their kibble. The retailer can tell that customer that meal mixers is an easy, simple, convenient way to add raw nutrition to any dog's meal.
Easy breezy, lemon squeezy.
Now, if that customer isn't interested in the meal mixers, you can take the Stellavator down another floor to the Stella Chewy's Kibble Above Suite. Welcome to the Kibble Above Suite. This is the floor where you go if that customer is not interested in any of our frozen or freeze-dried offerings. This is the gateway to the raw food category. This is where you go if that customer isn't ready to make the commitment to raw. The great thing about our kibble is it keeps you in the minimally processed conversation. Our kibble is different than other kibbles because it's oven baked. Oven baked is different from other kibbles because the majority of kibbles out there on the market are extruded. Extruded is using very high temperatures for a very short time period. You're talking about 30 to 60 seconds at 500 degrees. With that kind of heat, you're doing some serious damage to the nutrition in that kibble. The big difference between oven baked and extrusion is nutrient retention. When you're cooking something at 500 degrees, you lose quite a bit of the nutrition. Again, with the internal temperature of oven baked being measured at 196 for 4 to 5 minutes, you're not losing so much. It actually has about 80% nutrient retention. So the animal's gonna get more from eating less. The second great thing about oven baked is it's just flat out more palatable. Dogs love it, and it makes dogs' mealtime experience better than it's ever been before. Let's talk about the raw inclusion and the high meat content in both our raw coated and our raw blend. The raw coated has 65% meat. And in these different diets, it's either grass-fed, cage-free, or wild-caught. 65% meat in the raw coated, but the magic doesn't end there. Every single piece of our oven-baked kibble is coated with 2% raw. That means in a raw coated bag of kibble, that customer is getting 2% raw. A customer that's never fed raw before is now feeding our raw coated means that they've gone from 0 to 2%. That's dipping the toe in the water, and that's a great start. An even better choice would be our raw blend. Our raw blend has a higher meat content, and the diets are a little bit more exotic. We're talking 70% meat in our raw blends. And again, just like the raw coated, every single piece of our raw blend kibble is coated with 2% raw.
You're raw coated, and you're raw coated, and you're raw coated.
But inside the raw blend, it's all mixed with freeze-dried meal mixers. In a 22-pound bag of our raw blend kibble, that customer is getting 1 pound of raw. The incredible thing about the raw blend is that customer is getting an exceptional value. They're getting a high-end kibble and 18 ounces of freeze-dried raw. Most high-end kibbles cost about $70, and our meal mixers cost about $35. That means that customer is getting a $105 value for $79.99.
What did you say?
So we just got finished talking about the two biggest differentiators on our kibble versus the others out there. You have oven baked and you have the raw coated. But the third biggest differentiator is the strategy behind the kibble. This kibble is the gateway to getting more customers that have never been exposed to raw into the category. Get out! Raw coated's 2%, raw blend is 7%. You can start customers here if they've never had raw before. This is a great way to get them in. You can start them here, and over time you can work them up the Stellavator. The retailer can sell a bag of our raw coated or our raw blend kibble. The customer takes it home, feeds it to their animal, and mealtime experience for that dog will just be amazing. They'll come back, and when they pick up their next bag of food and that retailer's ringing them up, the retailer can say, hey, how'd your dog enjoy that raw coated or raw blend kibble? And that customer is going to say it was amazing. Then that retailer can say to the customer, have you tried their meal mixers? Have you tried their freeze-dried dinner patties? Or have you tried their frozen? We're making it a lot easier for that retailer to grow their raw category. Thanks, team. Thanks for watching. I'm going to take this Stellavator out.
That's all, folks.